One of the great chapters in my life was spending a sabbatical, mostly in the Holy Land. And I went to Caesarea Philippi, just mentioned in this gospel here. It's in pagan territory. It's 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. So Jesus was leaving Palestine the only time in his life. Why? Because John the Baptist had just been beheaded. Jesus had the same enemies. He knew his end was coming. He went away to do two things: to prepare himself for the passion that he was facing, and then to prepare his apostles to carry on after his passion, death, and resurrection. And so, at Caesarea Philippi, when you go there, if you get a chance, there's this huge wall, big, flat stone wall, as big as this church. And underneath of it is a little stream of water coming out. It's such an unusual kind of place. And so the pagans carved niches into the rock, and those niches were to the god Pan, a half goat, half human pagan god who is considered to be the protector of shepherds. So that's why the apostles, looking at these things, say, who is that? Tell us about that person. And Jesus says, well, who do people say that I am? And they go through all the list of names of what people think he is, Jeremiah, one of the prophets, and so forth and so forth. But that's not satisfying. Jesus doesn't care what people are saying. He cares what his apostles believe. So he asks them, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, the Father has revealed this to you. This is not flesh and blood talking. This is the Spirit. And so, as I was researching this, one of the scholars says, when is the last time you told your people what Jesus Christ meant to you? Because that's the important question. What does Jesus Christ mean to each of us? And so, to be personal for a bit, I will share how I've encountered and related to Jesus Christ in the different chapters of my life, which is something we need to understand, that our life, we have different chapters. Things are changing. We're changing with them. Jesus went into the desert after he was baptized by John. And the prophet Hosea said this, speaking of the human soul, which is always female in the scriptures, I will allure her now. I will lead her into the desert, and there I will speak to her heart. It is often in the desert experiences of our life that we really come to know God at a deeper level. When God seems absent and we still remain faithful, our faith is deepened. And I've experienced those desert moments in my life, and you will have desert moments in your life when life is all about surviving, just staying in. And that's important because I'm a very analytical person by nature. I don't have a lot of religious feelings. I hope that doesn't scandalize you. I live my life by convictions deep convictions that I have gained as I've lived my life. I've had faith problems, and a lot of analytical people do. And so, in the church, I noticed a lot of people have devout feelings, devout religious feelings. And for a long time, I felt really inferior. Like, should I be a priest because I don't have these religious feelings? like other people seem to. In fact, other people seem to think faith is about having the proper feelings, and me, I'm just kind of a dry stick. And then I realized, you know what? You make emptiness not an enemy, but a friend. You kind of get used to it. And the Holy Spirit leads you to understand certain things about life. And that makes all the difference. My department head in graduate school, in the seminary, said, a well-tended desert becomes its own kind of garden. And that's true. You just kind of get used to it. The desert sort of protects you from being puffed up. And that's a good thing. And so what I'm going to share is that in different parts of my own life, I have related to Jesus in different ways because of the different parts of his life and his experience. And that is a good thing to do. Where does your experience get enlightened by the experiences of Jesus Christ? Well, when I was growing up in this little wooden church in New Hampshire, which I didn't realize how small the church was until I grew up, but over the altar they had a stained glass window of Jesus in the agony in the garden. I have put that same picture into the sacristy. It reminds me of the church I was brought up. And I've related to sometimes to Jesus in the agony of the garden. I remember as a teenager burying my father in his 40s. It was one of the deep pits of my life. And Jesus, his agony in the garden, that related to me. I felt like I was in that garden with Jesus in that very horrible time in my life. And also, when they threw me out of the seminary and said, forget about being a priest, go out, get married, earn a living, the church has enough problems already, that was another extremely painful part of my life where I related to Jesus in the agony in the garden. And then I've also had some wonderful times. Jesus had wonderful times. At the very beginning of his ministry, he attracted a lot of people. There were 5,000 people on the mountaintop with him, which was a plain on top of a mountain. And he was reaching these people. And he was very popular. And it was a very successful time in his ministry, which only changed when he talked about the Eucharist, and that's when he lost most of his followers. But when Jesus was attending vast crowds, that related to me. I was assigned to start a parish from scratch. Of course, I had to find ground. We didn't have any buildings. We rented a church for Saturday night vigil mass. I will always remember going up the road to that church that we rented and wondering if anybody would be there. You know, you can be assigned to start a parish from scratch, but people might come and they might not. And I was just saying, well, what'll I do if I get there and the church is empty and I'm supposed to start a parish from scratch? And I got there, and the church was full. And that was the beginning of living inside of a miracle for 20 years. It was just a great experience for me. And the cardinal said to me, Paul, I could never do what you are doing. And to me, it was the best assignment in my life. And in my first assignment, which was a mess in many ways, I had a friend, Bob Carson. He and I and some other adults and teenagers put on a retreat down in the country. And what we did, without realizing it, is that we exported a kind of civil disturbance into the country. And I'll never forget what Bob Carson said to the boys who had done a lot of damage, thrown food around, flooded bathrooms, did all kinds of stuff. And they were all in a room. and they expected to be bawled out. These kids had been bawled out all kinds of times, and I didn't know what to say, but this is what Bob said. You've done a lot of damage, you've upset a lot of people, you disappointed the women and the girls on retreat, but there's one thing you didn't do. You did not prevent me from loving you. I will always love you. And when you need me, I will be there. And that's the first time in my life, and I was already a priest, that I understood what Jesus was talking about in terms of unconditional love. It transformed the boys. After that, they just behaved, they cleaned up. We had a great retreat. But it took somebody who understood that nobody can make me resentful. Nobody can push me to the land of hatred. Nobody can put a chip on my shoulder. Love is always more powerful in changing the world. And that's exactly what Jesus was teaching us, to love unconditionally. And I could go on. I have more notes here, but let me just say this. I've had a number of cancers, and when I was diagnosed with these cancers, I remembered how I almost once died in the middle of faith crises. And when I thought I was dying, I actually peacefully just turned myself over to God. I was surprised that I even had that faith deep down. And when I was diagnosed with these illnesses, and I don't have them anymore, I'm not looking for sympathy, I said, Lord, if you take me, I will go peacefully. I will make of myself my final gift to you. And if I live, I will serve you by your grace to my last breath. And that's exactly what Jesus did on the cross. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. So what I'm trying to say is, if we look at our life and look at Jesus' life, we see touching points. And those touching points are what Jesus means to us. Look at your life from the point of view of Jesus' life, because his experiences are duplicated in our own lives. So Jesus wanted to know, who am I? Who do you say that I am? Well, this morning, he addresses that question to each and every one of us. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit.